Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The death toll from COVID-19 in Brazil has topped 80,000 with 632 deaths in the past 24 hours. With more than 2,200 new cases, the countrywide infections have crossed 2.1 million. In the United States, the number of deaths is nearing 141,000 with more than 3.8 million people testing positive so far. In Pakistan, more than 5,600 people have lost their lives through the virus with over 40 deaths overnight. 1,013 new cases were recorded with the tally crossing 266,000. The virus has cost over 609,000 lives worldwide while infecting more than 14.6 million. Azerbaijan says it has downed 2 Armenian drones in the southern Adgam and northern Tuvuz regions. The country's defense ministry says the unmanned aerial vehicles were on an intelligence-gathering mission regarding the positions of Azerbaijani forces. Recent border clashes between the two countries have claimed the lives of 11 Azeri soldiers and 4 Armenian servicemen. European Union leaders have reached a deal on an $859 billion post-pandemic recovery package. The package offers grants, loans to the 27-nation bloc to counter the economic fallout of COVID-19. The deal was reached after a marathon summit that started on Friday in Brussels. China says it will resolutely respond to the UK over its interference in Beijing's internal affairs, which contravenes international law. Chinese embassy in the United Kingdom said Britain has repeatedly made wrong remarks on Hong Kong's national security law. This comes after London suspended its extradition treaty with Hong Kong indefinitely as a protest against the new law. And in football, the Wolves beat Crystal Palace by 2-0 in a Premier League clash at an empty Molineux Stadium. With this victory, the Wanderers have moved up to 6th place on the points table. News in detail after a short break. Welcome back now. The death toll from COVID-19 in Brazil has topped 80,000 with 632 deaths in the past 24 hours. With more than 2,200 new cases, the countrywide infections have crossed 2.1 million. In the United States, the number of deaths is nearing 141,000 with more than 3.8 million people testing positive so far. The virus has cost over 609,000 lives worldwide while infecting more than 14.6 million. More in this report.
While the world waits for a vaccine, COVID-19 continues to surge in the Americas, parts of Africa, and South Asia. American states of Florida, California, and Texas are the ones worst hit by the second wave, with over 60,000 infected in the country every day. Australia has extended its jobs support program as new coronavirus outbreaks threaten the economy.
So our plan for those who aren't in a job is to help them get into a job or train them for a job. Our plan for those who are on JobKeeper in a business that is still eligible for that is to maintain that support.
2 more cabinet ministers have tested positive in Latin America's worst-hit Brazil as President Jair Bolsonaro sticks to his stance against lockdowns. Colombia is now dealing an aggressive spread of the virus as cases and deaths in the country peak.
The
most challenging moments of the pandemic are coming, those which will put us all to the test as people, as a society, as a country. But I am certain that the same resilience that has strengthened us in the past will do so once again, and we will continue being the strong nation that the whole world knows us as.
Meanwhile, 11 new COVID-19 cases have been reported on the Chinese mainland, with 8 domestically transmitted. South Korea reported more than 40 new cases due to cluster infections tied to a nursing hospital in the capital city.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 40 deaths from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, raising the total to 5,639. The Health Ministry says 1,013 new cases were reported overnight as the tally crossed 266,000. Officials said more than 208,000 people have recovered from the virus so far. The ministry said there are now more than 52,000 active cases in the country. Sindh is the worst hit province with over 113,000 infections, while Punjab has reported more than 90,000 cases. Now, Azerbaijan says it has downed 2 Armenian drones in the southern Adgam and northern Tavuz regions. The country's defense ministry says the unmanned aerial vehicles were on an intelligence gathering mission regarding the positions of Azerbaijani forces. Recent border clashes between the two countries have claimed the lives of 11 Azeri soldiers and 4 Armenian servicemen. Earlier, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged both sides to exercise maximum restraint. The region also serves as a corridor for pipelines taking oil and gas from the Caspian Sea to the world markets. European Union leaders have reached a deal on an $859 billion post-pandemic economic recovery package. The fund offers grants and loans to the 27-nation bloc to counter the economic fallout of COVID-19. More about this in this report.
Marathon summit that started on Friday last week, European Union leaders have finally found common ground. The $2,100 billion budget and coronavirus recovery fund allocates $1,241 billion reconstruction of European Union post-pandemic. French President Emmanuel Macron has hailed this as a historic change in Europe. European Council President Charles Michel says this agreement sends a concrete signal that Europe is a force for action.
This is a strong deal, and most importantly, this is the right deal for Europe right now. I would like to thank all the leaders and the President of the Commission and their teams for their hard work.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel says the recovery fund shows the bloc is capable of acting jointly even during its biggest crisis. After being criticized for creating roadblocks in the deal's approval, the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte said relations with the bloc remain strong despite earlier difficult negotiations.
In the end, I'm very happy that what the Netherlands pays to Europe will be corrected for economic growth and inflation. That was the most important one.
The summit, which began in Brussels on Friday morning, saw more than 90 hours of talks and became the EU's longest since a 2000 meeting. News of the European Union's recovery fund has already sent European shares to a 4-month high, signaling positive sentiment in European markets.
The Afghan government says 20 army personnel have been killed in 3 different attacks in Kunduz, Badghis and Medan Vardak provinces. In a series of tweets, the Defense Ministry said 8 army personnel were killed after a suicide bomber targeted their convoy in Medan Vardak. It said 9 others were wounded in the attack on Syedabad district of the province. This comes after Kabul said the Taliban killed 12 Afghan troops in Kunduz and Badghis attacks. The Taliban have only claimed responsibility for the Kunduz attack. Spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid said the fighters also destroyed 2 tanks of the Afghan forces. Tehran says it's high time to create a club of countries hit by sanctions like Russia, China and Iran. Iran's ambassador to Russia, Qasem Jalali, said the countries that were targeted by Washington's sanctions should counteract. The diplomat said Washington does not want to see any rivals whose positions in any region will be stronger than those of the United States. Meanwhile, Iran is set to welcome Iraq's Prime Minister Mustafa al-Khadimi at the Mehrabad International Airport today. Tehran said the delegations of the 2 countries will begin bilateral talks. The Iraqi Prime Minister will also have a one-on-one meeting with the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. Now, a German activist, Hella Meusch, has been kidnapped by unknown gunmen in Iraq's capital, Baghdad. Police said Miris was abducted near her office on the Abu Nuwar Street during evening hours. The other teams from the Defence and Interior Ministries as well as police are searching the area. No group has claimed responsibility for the kidnapping yet. Miris is an activist and also the head of the Culture Department of German Goethe Institute in Baghdad. Meanwhile, Syria claims it has thwarted an Israeli air attack above the capital Damascus. State media said Israeli missiles came from over the Syrian Golan Heights, targeting areas around the capital. A Syrian military spokesperson said the air defense shot down most of the missiles. The spokesperson said some projectiles inflicted only material losses. Eyewitnesses said loud blasts were heard in the capital, which shook windows of several neighborhoods. There was no immediate comment from the Israeli officials. Egypt's Foreign Minister Sami Shokri says Cairo rejects any unilateral moves by Israel to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. Shokri said this in a meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah. In a statement, Egyptian Foreign Ministry said Shokri affirmed Cairo's support for the Palestinian cause and the rights of the Palestinians. The two leaders discussed steps and means to allow for the resumption of peace efforts under a two-state solution. Abbas expressed his appreciation for the support of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and his leadership to the Palestinian cause. Shokri's tour began on Sunday with a visit to Jordan's capital, Amman, where he met King Abdullah. In Egypt, the parliament has authorized President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to deploy troops to Libya after its tribal leaders sought Cairo's intervention. In a statement, the parliament said the troops will target criminal militias and foreign terrorist groups. Egypt's House of Representatives unanimously approved the plan after a closed-door session. Earlier, el-Sisi and the US President Donald Trump agreed on the need to maintain a ceasefire in Libya during a telephonic conversation. In a statement, Egypt's presidency said both leaders also agreed to avoid an escalation between the forces fighting in Libya. Meanwhile, Turkey demanded an immediate end to the support of Khalifa Haftar after trilateral talks in Ankara between Libyan, Turkish and Maltese officials. The Turkish Defense Ministry says 2 of its soldiers have been killed in a terrorist attack in southeastern part of the country. In a statement, the ministry said the terrorists attacked the area of a military base with rockets and the Hakkari province. It said the wounded soldiers were taken to a hospital where they succumbed to their injuries. After the attack, security forces launched an operation against the terrorists with combat helicopters and armed unmanned aerial vehicles. The statement did not specify what terrorist group was behind the attack. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has arrived in the United Kingdom, with China and Huawei expected to be on the agenda. Last week, Pompeo took fresh aim at China, saying the U.S. will impose visa restrictions on Chinese firms like Huawei. But Pompeo said Washington remained hopeful China will complete its requirement under Phase 1 of the trade deal. U.S.-China ties are at the lowest ebb in decades, with relations strained over the global coronavirus pandemic. Meanwhile, China says it will resolutely respond to UK over its interference in Beijing's internal affairs, which contravenes international law. Chinese embassy in the UK said Britain has repeatedly made wrong remarks on Hong Kong's national security law. This comes after the UK suspended its extradition treaty with Hong Kong indefinitely. UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said early arrangements between the two countries will not be reactivated unless there are clear safeguards which are able to prevent extradition from the UK being misused under the new national security legislation. France says it will not ban China's Huawei from investing in the country, reaffirming Paris's relations with Beijing. But Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said France's national interests and sensitive locations will be protected. The US State Department has been pressuring allies not to use Huawei's 5G. Le Maire said, unlike Britain, Paris will not impose a blanket ban on Huawei. Washington initially accused the Chinese tech giant of being an espionage tool of the Chinese government. But when those accusations were falsified, the State Department has now taken a position accusing China of human rights abuses. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has also proposed a block of 5G clean countries against Chinese telecommunication companies. So far, Poland and the United Kingdom have backed the initiative. South Korea has launched its first military communication satellite into space atop a SpaceX Falcon 9 Block 5 rocket in Florida, U.S. The South Korean Arms Procurement Agency says the launch makes SEOUL the world's 10th country to own a dedicated military satellite. The Defense Acquisition Program Administration said the satellite successfully communicated with the Space Operations Center in France after launching. It said the satellite is expected to reach its orbit of 36,000 kilometers in 2 weeks. The project is part of an offset package for South Korea's purchase of 40 F-35A fighter jets from Lockheed Martin in 2014. Lockheed subcontracted the satellite manufacturing deal in 2016 to Airbus. Russia says its military drill in the country is not against other nations, nor is it linked with the recent Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. At least 150,000 soldiers are participating in the combat exercise that will end on July 21st. In a meeting with the foreign diplomats in Moscow, Deputy Defense Minister Alexander Fomin said the drills are aimed towards improving Russia's surprise combat readiness. He added the joint teams perform tasks to eliminate the consequences of technological accidents. Over 26,000 units of arms and military equipment, 414 aircraft, 106 ships are engaged in the drills. Now, Russia claims its first vaccine against the new coronavirus is ready. In an interview, First Deputy Defense Minister Ruslan Zalikov said the vaccine has been created by military specialists and scientists. Zalikov said the final assessments on the results of the testing by the scientists of National Research Center have been made already. The Defense Ministry said the vaccine has gone through successful completion of clinical trials. It said at the moment of release, all volunteers without exception developed immunity against the COVID-19 and felt normal. In June, the ministry issued a permit for clinical tests of liquid and frozen dried vaccines being tested on 43 volunteers for each kind. In the United States, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden has vowed to include Muslim Americans in his administration if he wins the November election. Speaking at a webinar to Muslim American voters, Biden said he will end the travel ban seen as targeting Muslim-majority countries. Biden said that Muslim Americans were the first to feel the assault from Donald Trump's harsh policies. The Democratic nominee said he wished Americans were taught more in schools about the Islamic faith. Several elected Muslim Americans have endorsed Biden for president in a letter organized by Engage Action ahead of the summit. Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, and Indiana Congresswoman Andre Carson were among the signatories. President Donald Trump has threatened to send law enforcement personnel to major U.S. cities to counter anti-racism protests. He said New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, Baltimore, Oakland, and California are possible areas for sending in federal forces. Officers last week began cracking down on Portland protests against police brutality and systemic racism. They used tear gas and took some activists into custody without explanation. State and local leaders in Oregon, as well as members of the Congress, have called for Trump to remove Department of Homeland Security officers from Portland. But Trump says the protesters are anarchists who must be handled through the troops.
More federal law enforcement, that I can tell you. In Portland, they've done a fantastic job. They've been there 3 days, and they really have done a fantastic job in a very short period of time. No problem. They grab them, a lot of people in jail. They're leaders. These are anarchists. These are not protesters. People say protesters. These people are anarchists. These are people that hate our country. And we're not going to let it go forward.
Despite a national outcry over the tactics, Department of Homeland Security officials said they will not back down and will not apologize. Now, moving on, presidents of Nigeria, Ghana and Ivory Coast are headed to Mali to try and end the political crisis unraveling in the country. Mali is struggling with rising unrest amid a crumbling economy due to the fallout of COVID-19. In a joint statement, the West Africa bloc, ECOWAS, said the visit is aimed at negotiating a truce. Earlier, Mali's President Boubacar Keïta announced the dissolution of the Constitutional Court in an attempt to calm unrest. But demonstrators say their civil disobedience movement will not end until the Keïta government is ousted. Protesters say 20 people have been killed while the Health Ministry puts the toll at 11. European stocks have risen after EU leaders reached a deal on an $857 billion COVID-19 recovery fund. Positive news in the hunt for a coronavirus vaccine has buoyed market sentiment in Europe. All sectors, our major bourses, are trading in positive territory. The pan-European stock 600 climbed over 1% in early trade, with banks adding almost 3.5% to lead gains. London's FTSE has gained over 0.5%, while France's CAC 40 is up almost 1.5%. Germany's DAX has jumped almost 2%. Earlier, most Asian shares also traded higher, with the exception of mainland Chinese shares. In football, the Wolves beat Crystal Palace by 2-0 in a Premier League clash at an empty Molineux Stadium. With this victory, the Wanderers have moved up to 6th place on the points table. Striker Daniel Podence scored his first goal for the Wolves by nodding in from the close range. Castro Otto added the second one in the 68th minute to extend Wolves' lead. The home win has brightened the Europa League hopes for the Wanderers with one more game to play. In the day's other matches, Newcastle United played a goalless draw against Brighton, while Everton edged Sheffield United by 1-0. In the Italian Serie A, Juventus beat Lazio by 2-1 at an empty Allianz Stadium. Cristiano Ronaldo scored twice and became the first player to score 50 goals in a Serie A, La Liga and the Premier League. After a goalless first half, Ronaldo struck the first goal with a penalty shot in 51st. He added another one in quick succession to extend the lead for Juventus. Ciro Immobile scored the consolation penalty for Lazio in dying minutes of the match. Juve are 8 points clear of the Inter Milan and need 4 points to clinch a 9th consecutive title. England beat West Indies by 113 runs in the second test at Old Trafford to level the match series 1 each. Chasing a target of 312 runs, the visitors were bowled out for 198 runs. Shamar Brooks was top scorer for West Indies with 62 runs. Other than Jermaine Blackwood and Brooks, no West Indian batsman was able to resist fiery England bowling. Ben Stokes was declared man of the match for his all-round performance. The last test of match will be played on 24th of July. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.